Somewhere out there is a small group of men between 70 and 85 whose prostate genuinely doesn't bother them much. No constant trips to the bathroom, no pressure creeping in by mid-afternoon, no planning their whole day around where the nearest restroom sits. If that's not you yet, I want to tell you what I found out those men tend to have in common, and it isn't what I expected either. I'm 83. For years, by 4 in the afternoon, my ankles would swell up like bread dough left too long on the counter, and by evening, my whole lower body felt heavy in a way that seemed to have nothing to do with my prostate at all. In the next few minutes, I'll walk you through the connection nobody ever explained to me, the one that finally eased both problems at once. These days, I get through a full afternoon of yard work without that heavy, swollen feeling creeping into my legs, and my nights are calmer too. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying it because I spent years treating those two things as completely separate problems, and they weren't separate at all. The swelling came first, years before I connected it to anything else. My ankles would puff up sitting in my recliner reading the paper, and by dinner time my socks left deep red rings around my calves that took an hour to fade. I chalked it up to circulation, the way men my age tend to chalk up most things, just another item on the long list of what happens when you get old. Nothing to be done except keep your feet up when you can. What I didn't connect for a long time was that my worst nights, the ones with the most bathroom trips and the most pressure, always seemed to follow my worst days for swelling. I never once mentioned it to my doctor as related. I bring up the ankle swelling at one appointment, months later mention the nighttime bathroom trips at another, and in my mind those were two separate old man problems that just happened to both be true about me. It took a physical therapist my daughter recommended, someone who specializes in circulation and swelling in older adults, to finally connect the two for me. I'd gone to see her about my ankles specifically, hoping for some relief, and almost as an aside I mentioned my rough nights too, the way you mention something you've stopped expecting anyone to actually solve. She didn't seem surprised at all. In fact, she said she hears the exact same combination from a good number of the older men who come through her door, and that most of them, like me, had never once thought to mention the two things in the same appointment. She told me that when fluid pools in your legs during the day from sitting or standing without much movement, gravity holds it there while you're upright. But the moment you lie down at night, that fluid doesn't just disappear, it has to go somewhere, and a lot of it gets reabsorbed into your bloodstream and eventually has to be processed by your kidneys and passed as urine, often in the first few hours after you lie flat. She said this pattern is especially common in men my age because we tend to sit more during the day than we did decades earlier, and our leg muscles, which normally help pump fluid back up toward the heart with every step, simply aren't doing that job as often as they used to. That explains something that had puzzled me for years, why my worst nights for bathroom trips so often came after my most sedentary days, the days I'd sat the longest without moving much at all. It wasn't really about my prostate working differently on those days. It was about how much fluid had pooled in my legs during the day, waiting to get redistributed the moment I finally lay down. She explained it to me using a picture I could actually hold on to. Think of your legs during the day like a low-lying reservoir, she said. Gravity keeps water flowing downhill and pooling there while you're upright, especially if you're not moving your leg muscles enough to pump that fluid back up toward your heart. Lie down at night, and that reservoir starts draining back into general circulation. Your kidneys, doing exactly what they're supposed to do, process that returning fluid, and your bladder fills faster than it would have otherwise, right in the hours you're trying to sleep through. For years, one number ran my life. The PSA. It would tick up a point and I'd lie awake the whole night certain it meant the worst, picturing the biopsy, the knife, the end of everything. Then someone finally told me the truth no doctor had. That number doesn't measure cancer. It measures your prostate. And as we age, it climbs mostly because the gland is simply enlarging, benign, swollen, and uncomfortable, not the worst. The number was scaring me half to death over something ordinary. And the prescriptions they push to shrink it? They can flatten your drive completely, soften everything, quietly take the man right out of you. I wasn't willing to trade that away. There's a gentle way to support that gland, keep it comfortable, a healthy size, without surrendering any of that. Keep getting checked every year, of course. At 83, that number doesn't own me anymore. I finally have peace. Let me show you what gave it to me in this video. And if you want the simple support I personally use, there's a free presentation linked in the description below. So here's what she actually had me try, and what I've stuck with since. Knee-high compression socks, worn during the day, not overnight, just during my normal waking hours, mornings especially when I'm sitting more and moving less. She explained that research following people wearing daytime compression socks found real improvement in the swelling and fluid buildup that tends to redistribute at night as extra urgency and discomfort. It wasn't a treatment aimed at my prostate directly. It was aimed at the fluid pooling that had been quietly adding to my nighttime burden the whole time. Alongside the socks, she had me build in two more pieces. A few minutes of ankle pumps and short walks scattered through the day, especially if I'd been sitting a long stretch, to help my leg muscles do their normal job of pushing fluid back upward instead of letting it just pool. And elevating my feet for 15 minutes in the late afternoon before dinner rather than waiting until bedtime when the fluid had already had all day to accumulate. The mechanism made sense once she laid it out plainly. Compression socks apply gentle, graduated pressure that helps push fluid back up your legs during the day instead of letting it settle and pool. Less fluid pooled by evening means less fluid available to redistribute the moment you lie down, which means a calmer bladder through more of the night. I'll admit the socks felt strange the first week. Getting them on over an 83-year-old set of ankles first thing in the morning is its own small workout, and I fumbled with them more than I'd like to admit before my wife showed me a trick with a plastic bag over my foot to slide them on easier. But by the second week, I'd built it into my morning routine right alongside my coffee, and it stopped feeling like a chore at all. The ankle pumps felt a little silly at first, too, sitting in my recliner, flexing my feet up and down like I was pedaling an invisible bicycle while watching the morning news. My wife caught me doing it the first time and laughed before I explained what the therapist had told me. After that, she started doing them along with me during the commercials, and it turned into something we did together rather than one more solitary exercise I had to remember on my own. Elevating my feet before dinner took the longest to actually stick. For years, my habit had been to collapse into the recliner only after the dishes were done and the kitchen was clean, which put my feet up right before bed instead of hours earlier when it would have done the most good. Shifting that 15-minute window to 4:30 in the afternoon meant rearranging a routine I'd had for decades, and it took real, deliberate effort the first couple of weeks before it stopped feeling backwards. By the third week, I noticed my ankles weren't nearly as puffy by dinner time. By the sixth week, the nighttime trips had dropped noticeably, not gone completely, but down from 3 most nights to 1, sometimes none. I started keeping a small tally by the bed the way I had with other changes before, mostly to keep myself honest about whether the improvement was real or just something I wanted to believe. Last weekend, I stood the whole length of my grandson's Little League game, 2 hours on bleachers and pacing the fence line without once needing to sit down because of heavy, aching legs the way I would have a year earlier. My son-in-law noticed before I said a word about it. I think about a man named Claude who wrote in after an earlier video, 76, a retired postal supervisor who told me his ankles had swelled so badly some evenings that his shoes left marks that lasted well into the next morning. He'd never once thought to connect that swelling to his rough nights either, assuming, like I had, that they were simply 2 separate burdens of getting older that happened to show up in the same body. When he heard about the fluid connection, he started with the compression socks alone, worn just in the mornings at first because that's when he was most sedentary, reading and having coffee for hours before doing much else. Within a few weeks, he added the afternoon leg elevation too, propping his feet on a stack of pillows while he watched the evening news instead of just sitting flat. He told me the change crept in gradually, a little less swelling each week, until one morning he realized he'd gone an entire night without getting up at all, something he couldn't remember happening in years. Claude told me he'd actually been to see his doctor twice in the previous year, specifically about the ankle swelling, and both times the conversation stayed focused entirely on his heart and his salt intake, never once touching on his nights. He wasn't upset about that. He understood his doctor only had a few minutes and had to prioritize the obvious concerns first. But he said learning the fluid connection himself and being able to bring it up directly at his next appointment changed the whole conversation. His doctor confirmed there was nothing dangerous going on, just ordinary postural fluid pooling, and actually encouraged him to keep up with the socks and the walking he'd already started on his own. He also mentioned something that stuck with me. He said the hardest habit to keep wasn't the socks or the walking. It was simply remembering to put his feet up before dinner instead of after, because after decades of doing it the other way around, his body seemed to want the old order back every single evening. He set a small kitchen timer to remind himself for the first month, and after that it became automatic enough that he didn't need the reminder anymore. If you're on medication for your heart, your circulation, or your prostate, please talk to your doctor before starting compression socks, since certain circulation conditions need to be ruled out first. And keep up with your regular prostate checkups without exception. This isn't a substitute for that care. It's something real you can do alongside it. What I want you to walk away with is this. The discomfort you've been treating as purely a prostate problem might actually be tangled up with something as ordinary as fluid pooling in your legs during the day. That's not me telling you every swollen ankle means the same thing. It's me telling you there's a real, gentle connection here worth looking into. Here's what I settled on, a few drops a day. And let me tell you why it works. One compound calms one signal, but a swollen prostate answers when several are calmed at once. The growth signal, the inflammation, the pressure inside it. So what I use concentrates them, working as one, the way the research actually uses them, not a single ingredient pretending to be enough. A gland that stays comfortable and a healthy size, fewer trips, and the quiet of no longer fearing that number. It leaves the man fully intact, none of that flattening the prescriptions can do. It's linked right under this video, go look for yourself. It won't replace your doctor or your yearly check. It supports the biology right alongside them. I'm 83, and that number doesn't own me anymore. I think about the man I was, propping swollen ankles on a footstool and assuming my rough nights were an unrelated curse of old age. And I think about the man I am now, who pulls on a pair of socks each morning because it genuinely eases something real, both in my legs and in my sleep. That's the difference, not a miracle, just finally seeing how two things I'd always kept separate were connected the whole time. If you've ever noticed your worst nights following your most sedentary days, tell me about it in the comments. I read every one myself. And if this kind of plain, honest explanation is useful to you, go ahead and subscribe. There's more of this coming every